The parable of the prodigal son is one of the most well-known stories told by Jesus, found in the Gospel of Luke 15:11-32. The story speaks of forgiveness, repentance, and God's unconditional love. Here's a more detailed elaboration, the setting and background. Jesus tells the story in response to the grumbling of the Pharisees and religious leaders, who criticized him for welcoming sinners. He uses this parable to teach about God's love for the lost and his willingness to forgive. The story begins with a father who has two sons. The younger son, dissatisfied with his life at home, asks his father for his share of the inheritance. This request is highly unusual, as inheritances are typically given after the father's death. Essentially, the younger son is asking his father to act as though he were already dead. Despite the insult, the father agrees and divides his estate between the two sons. The younger son's journey. Once the younger son receives his share, he leaves home and travels to a far-off country, where he squanders his wealth in wild living. This represents a life of indulgence and poor choices, perhaps symbolizing the temptation of worldly pleasures over spiritual wisdom. The son spends all his money, and a severe famine strikes the land, leaving him in dire need. In a desperate situation, the younger son takes a job feeding pigs, an occupation considered disgraceful for a Jewish man, as pigs are unclean animals in Jewish culture. He becomes so hungry that he longs to eat the food meant for the pigs. This moment marks his lowest point, as he realizes the consequences of his actions and reflects on his life. The moment of repentance. In his moment of despair, the younger son comes to his senses and decides to return to his father. He realizes that even his father's hired servants are better off than he is, and so he resolves to ask for forgiveness. He prepares a humble speech, acknowledging that he has sinned against heaven and his father and is no longer worthy to be called his son. Instead, he hopes his father might take him back as one of his hired servants. The father's response. As the younger son returns, his father sees him from a distance. The father, filled with compassion, runs to embrace his son. In ancient times, it was considered undignified for a man to run, but the father does so out of love. He embraces his son and welcomes him home without hesitation. The son begins to recite his prepared speech, but the father interrupts, calling for a celebration. The father orders his servants to bring the best robe, a ring and sandals for his son. The robe represents honor, the ring signifies authority, and the sandals indicate that the son is no longer a servant, but a member of the family. The father then orders a feast to be prepared, declaring that they should celebrate because his son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Older son's reaction. Meanwhile, the older son, who has been working in the field, returns home and hears the sound of music and dancing. When he learns that his young